everyone, and welcome to Vassals of Kingsgrave's Great Linear A Song of Ice and Fire Reread. This is episode 76, and it could potentially spoil any events in George R. R. Martin's published series, including TWOW Preview Chapters. It will not, however, contain show spoilers. The last episode ended with Jaime arriving in Harrenhal on March 23rd, and in this episode we will cover Alayne 1/Sansa 1 and Brienne 4 from Feast and Bran 3 from Dance. These events take place between March 23rd to 27th. And before talking about the chapters, let me give a shout out to our listeners. Thank you for your patience, because we know the reread has been slow this past few months, and we wanted to take the time to breathe so that it could come back better and with a clear organization on our side. We have also decided to record an episode only when a previous one is published, so that leaves room for you guys to ask questions or make remarks and for us to follow up in the next episode. So feel free. With that said, I'm Mary, aka Nymeria on the forums. I'll be your host today. For this episode, I'm joined by Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah, also known as Lady Weaver on the forums.
We also have Zach.
Hi, I'm Zach, also known as Alias on the forums. Glad to be here.
And we have Duncan.
G'day, this is Duncan, also known as Valkyrist on the forums. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you guys for being here. We might have Jock later. This is a great team. I'm happy to have the three of you. So let's jump in. And so after Jaime 3, we jump to Sansa 2/Alayne 1 in Feast. This takes place on the same day, March 23rd, and we have skipped back 3 chapters and 50 pages. And I believe Sarah will read a recap for us.
Yes, that is correct. I will read a recap for you. Okay. Okay. So, autumn has started to wane in the Vale in the time since Lysa's death. Sweet Robin has heard Marillion singing every night since then, and his health is getting worse. His fits are more severe and come more often. Littlefinger suggests that Maester Coleman give Sweet Robin a pinch of sweet sleep, a painless poison used by assassins. Despite his reticence, the Maester agrees. The Lords Declarant have gathered at Runestone and made a pact, agreeing to defend Lord Robert, the Vale, and one another. While the declaration made no direct mention of Littlefinger, their distrust of him was implied with phrases like false friends and evil counsellors, and, I quote, the misrule that must be ended. They are stopping food from entering the Eyrie until the demands are met, and that is that Sweet Robin is turned over to their care. Littlefinger and the Lords Declarant agree to parley. Sansa, now fully immersed in her role as Alayne Stone, plays Lady of the House and readies the solar to be used. The parley Lords Declarant, Littlefinger, Alayne, Lothbrun, and Nestorois and Lyn Corbray attending. The Lords Declarant are confused by Littlefinger saying that he wished to sign the declaration. Jon Royce refuses and tells him that they are there to remove him as Lord Protector, and that they want him gone from the Vale and for Sweet Robin to be fostered by the Royces to interact with boys of a similar age. Littlefinger suggests that Lady Waynwood send him Harry the Heir, and that Robert Arryn continues to stay with him in the Eyrie, and for Harry to be his squire, and for him to be someone to look up to. Almost sparks a sword fight against Lothbrun, causing their parley to all be for naught. And this is until Jon Royce commands Lyn Corbray to put up his steel and stop. Because of this, Littlefinger is able to strong-arm the Lords Declarant and get what he wants out of them. So now he has until the end of the year to set the Vale to rights or to step down as Lord Protector. At the end of the chapter, late at night, after some of the Lords Declarant have departed or are asleep in their beds, Sansa asks Peter Baelish, what he plans for the next year. Littlefinger says he wishes to continue his tutelage of Alayne in playing the Game of Thrones, and that one or two of the older lords may die over the course of the year, and that Lord Gilwood Hunter may well be killed by his younger brother Harlan, who arranged for their Lord Father's death. Peter admits that he will never be able to sway Bronze Yon, and when Alayne inquires about Sir Lyn Corbry, he tells her that he can be bought with gold and boys and promises. Thank you.
Sneaky Patire, up to no good.
Oh, pretty much. Oh, sorry, I'm getting over a cold and my nose was blocked at the end, and I'm like, no, Sarah, you need to keep going.
It's cold in the area.
It's okay.
It is.
It is.
High altitude.
I mean, like, that's the real worry, isn't it, though? It's getting cold there, and they need to go down, but if they didn't actually make an agreement, they'd be forced to spend the winter up there and freeze.
Yeah, and without any fresh food or anything coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is actually, like, it's one of Benne's points that she doesn't really understand why the Lord Declarants just gave up and were like, oh, okay, you can have the year, because they have the strength here to, like, just have a siege almost. Isn't
it a matter of honor on their part? Because Lyn Corbry was on their side and a member of the group they brought with them, and because he dishonored the parley and raised arms in the meeting room. Yeah, but it's kind of too easy.
I think it really highlights...
That's why Littlefinger's paying him off.
Yeah.
I know. I think it highlights how masterful Littlefinger is at diplomacy. Like, he just sets the scene so perfectly. He bends everything in his favor, and he relies on the fact that, you know, he knows that the Vale Lords don't actually want to go to war because, you know, one, they're not prepared for war. This is all really a show. Two, they know winter's coming and they need to, you know, hunker down and gather their resources for the winter and have a unified realm, because the rest of the realm's falling apart. So he knows they don't have the resolve for war. So he calls their bluff, essentially. But also just the scene is amazing, because he just, he perfectly sort of, he makes it a very welcoming scene so that it sort of highlights them as being irrational. And, you know, he stages this scene with Corbray to put them on the defensive, to make them seem like the agitators, to cast any of his critics as irrational and violent and dishonorable.
Yeah, totally. About the scene, do you think that Littlefinger checked what Sansa did? Like, she could have chosen to arrange the seats differently and it wouldn't have worked for him or something like that. Do you think he came in to check, or did he trust her, like, blindly?
I mean, he possibly double-checked, but he is sort of mentoring her in a way, so he maybe, you know, put some trust in her ability to I mean, I guess that's her job, to make them feel welcome. She's the sort of soft face on the situation. And she's also an unassuming face. You know, there's a scene where she's dressing, she sort of puts on a dress, and she deliberately chooses quite a muted color in order to, I guess, not call too much attention to herself. And in doing so, she actually overhears a bit of information, because they don't regard her very highly. They consider her a bastard. So they just kind of talk openly in front of her, and she uses that information to her advantage. So she's learning. She is learning under Littlefinger's tutelage, and I think he kind of respects that and trusts her to an extent.
Yeah. I had a question actually about Sansa and what they think of her, because at some point Lady Waynwood says the girl is young and gently bred and has suffered through enough horrors, and I was like, what does she know about what this fake girl has lived? I mean, I know Littlefinger kind of imagined a whole life for her, but he didn't necessarily spread it. So this sentence was weird to me.
I was just going to say that Jon Royce, when he first sees her, like, smiled at her and is just like, do I know you? So
yeah, but the question is, my question was, does Lady Waynwood know? I mean, how could she? And it doesn't make sense that she would, but then...
Family resemblance to Liza, though? Like, Liza is her aunt. Like, there is a family resemblance.
Yeah.
Do you mean what horrors is she referring to?
Yeah,
Well, the horrors
Like
is
she has
witnessing.
suffered through enough horrors.
Yeah, isn't it Marillion's
Oh, yeah.
attempted murder? That's what she's referring to of Lysa.
Oh, yeah.
Or
Yeah, that
successful
makes
murder,
sense.
I guess. And then the trial and all that.
And as well, there's war throughout all of the realms, so even though she was raised by scepters, like traveling to the Vale, possibly she would have seen a lot of hardship.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I didn't think that Lady Wenwood knew, but I was like, this sentence is weird. But you're right, it's just the whole Marillion thing. Sorry.
It's so creepy. Sorry.
I was just going to say, maybe it's also just that there's an unspoken assumption that the life of a bastard will just be horrific in all ways. So that's the stock line you pull out for any bastard that might be dealing with anything.
Yeah, she's an unfortunate.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. But it was so creepy when Lynn Corbray was like talking about her being flowered and whether she's ready to be bedded, and like he's so lecherous, and it was really creepy. But when you actually realize that he's he's in the pocket of Littlefinger, I was sort of starting to think like he's trying to like just make the Lord's Declarants uncomfortable and kind of create infighting between them, make them feel ununited. So he's kind of undermining them in a sense and making them, I guess, just kind of spreading his dishonor onto the rest of them.
Yeah, well, maybe not spreading his dishonor, but also like he's not making any attempt to be more honorable than he normally is and to act in a gentlemanly way. He's just like, yeah, whatever. I don't care because I don't really have a dog in this fight. So go for it. I'll fuck it up for everyone.
So what do you guys think the impetus is to even bring him along? Why would they choose Lynn Corbray to come with them?
Did he really give them a choice?
I feel like, is he going to just kill them if they
Well, no. Like, they seem to me like they're not going to refuse someone who's who's criticizing Littlefinger as much as he is, even though they don't really agree with the way he behaves himself.
Do you think as well it's to try to scare Littlefinger because, hey, look, we have this fantastic fighter on our side who really is a bit of a loaded gun that's willing to go off, and he's very against you and what you are doing?
Well, when you see how Sansa is reacting to the news that he's coming up, you can see why that would work. Yes, if Littlefinger would react the same way.
I think maybe it's a show of force. Maybe they're just showing that they have the majority. They have the most, they'll take anyone that's against Littlefinger, and he's a loud opponent of Littlefinger, so he obviously insisted that he'd be allowed to come as well. But they didn't count on the fact that Littlefinger would exploit that they would let anyone into their coup, and that he would be able to plant spies within that majority.
And as well, it's Lynn Corbray's brother, the one that actually is Lord of the House, is with Littlefinger. So whether it's that even though you have the Lord of the House, that doesn't mean you have everyone in the house agreeing with you as far as they are concerned. So it's to show that.
We have this crazy guy with this sword. Look how cool we are and powerful.
But as well that you might just have the Lord agreeing with you rather than their whole house and all of the members with it, or even the people.
He is a pretty impressive fighter, though. Like, he did clash swords with Robert Baratheon in Gulltown. He fought on the Trident, I believe. So he's, he's up there, I guess.
He killed the Dornish. He killed one of the Kingsguard as well.
Yeah,
Lewin Martell, yeah.
Yeah, so which would put him up with Barristan in fighting prowess, if not honor.
Yep.
True enough. It's kind of like a dangerous sort of game they're playing. There's a high risk, high reward of bringing someone like that along.
Yeah. But I guess it is one of those things, like, you kind of want legendary fighters on your side. Like, when Barristan went missing, everyone was asking about him. That was the first question that Renly asked of Catelyn. Where is Barristan? Is he with you? Like, that kind of, it's a prestigious thing to have a fighter like that. And he's obviously no Barristan, but he's still pretty, he's still got some prestige
Formidable.
to him. Formidable, yeah.
Do you think that, like, Barristan would lend legitimacy to whoever he went to? Whereas, like, do you think Lynn Corbray's along the same lines of, like the Mountain or the Hound, where it's such a good fighter that it's not necessarily legitimacy, but maybe like a sense of fear or apprehension against going up against them in the future.
Well, Barriston's reputation is so strong that wherever he goes with, people will just assume how honourable he is, that they have the strongest claim.
Yeah. I think with Corbray, it's like Zach says, it's a high risk, high reward. It's a double-edged blade. He could be a formidable fighter, but he could also do something stupid and tarnish your cause, which is what he did in this situation.
It's sort of an interesting thing to think about, the kind of meta aspect of war, where you have these names that have such a huge reputation of being either skilled in combat or the deeds they've achieved, and how that kind of sweeps through the lines of men and how they respond to that. Like, they have Barristan with them, or they have Lynn Corbray or whoever, and that can actually or affect morale in a pretty dramatic way.
Absolutely,
it's kind of an interesting thing.
Well, that's pretty much how Robert ran his. That's pretty much how Robert ran his rebellion. That was his reputation, as this ultra-masculine martial prowess that men would just flock to. This great leader of men, this legendary figure trying to reclaim his lost love. That was like the driving narrative of the rebellion.
As well, Robert's rebellion, he had the narrative that the people would love, that, I'm off to find my lady love who was kidnapped. I'm trying to save her. And then Ned's family being killed, that's also a great narrative for people to try to get behind and support of.
Yeah. Coming back to Alayne Corbray, I think we said it and we pretty much all agree. He's a show of force, and the Lord Defendants, it's good for them to have a lot of people on their side, but it was also kind of a mistake to bring him to the Eyrie, because he basically made the whole negotiations go south. So, double-edged sword, as we said.
And Littlefinger, as he says, he can lend his sword to any plot to overthrow Littlefinger, which is brilliant. And Sansa susses it out, which is equally brilliant. She's learning. She's quite adept at this.
Yep.
And I love the fact that she's like, I couldn't sleep. I had to know, why did you buy a year? How is that going to change anything? And she wants to understand.
Yeah, which is also great because, things might be happening around you, but if you don't understand why, it doesn't help you learn. But if you understand why people are making decisions, it really does help you learn. And then that way in future, you can try to think about things that way as well.
Yeah,
it's really clever too. It shows how Littlefinger is playing the long game, because, as Bennett points out, he doesn't actually have any advantage over these people. They could take the castle by force and kick him out of the Vale. But if he can gain time, he can see how the situation can be reshaped a year from now. Several of those lords are probably just going to die of old age. He can turn a few of the other ones. He can set himself up with Harry Harding and Sansa, gain some more allies. And a year from now, he'll be in a much stronger position to just flat out stay, regardless of what any of the declarants say.
Yep. And as well, in a year or coming up at 9 months, if people aren't changing their minds, and if they haven't, and he doesn't have the majority, he can just start having people murdered in their beds pretty much.
And hey, he may, turn good on his promise. He may make it a stable realm. He may, make it strong, or a stable kingdom, make it strong, get the resources flowing, shore up the borders, everything he promised. But he's in an incredibly strong position. He's got, he's been named the Lord Protector. He's got the Lord. He's got Harry Harding, the heir, coming there. He's got Alayne as his daughter, the future wife of the heir potentially, but also the wet nurse of Robert. So he's got that familial connection. Robert's Sansa's the only one that Robert will listen to.
Yeah, but as well, Robert still wants to marry her. Because that's what he said ages ago. Sorry. Well, ages ago in my reading, anyway.
Yeah.
Do we agree that Littlefinger is poisoning Sweet Robin?
Yes.
Yes.
Because Sweet Sleep?
Yeah.
The one he wants to give.
He's the one
that's actually
making
a poison.
the suggestion. Yeah.
He's the one making the suggestion, and the maester's just I don't really want to. And then Littlefinger's do it, and he's okay, fine, I'll do it. Don't kill me. I'll do it.
Yeah.
But also I think the mace is like, I'll do a tiny amount. Like, a tiny amount, so hopefully I won't kill him. But if they give him, like, 2 doses accidentally or something like that, or just too much, it'll be enough to kill him.
Yeah, I feel like Sweet Robin's not long for this world, and Littlefinger's got someone to blame in the Maester. You know, you can just say the Maester gave him too much, and he'll be blamed, just as Marillion was blamed for the death of Lysa.
Yeah.
So he's creating that plan, he's putting it in effect. And also, I thought the idea that Sweet Robin was hearing Marillion singing at night, that was almost like this dark foreboding that he was going to follow Marillion down the track to death.
It is. Actually, in Bina's note, she mentions Marillion, and I like what she said.
Yeah, she's
So,
she's asking if Marillion really did commit suicide, or she's actually suggesting that maybe Littlefinger will give him to Alayne Corbray as his reward.
actually,
Oh, if he's alive still.
Yeah.
in the chapter, Sansa says that Sweet Robin never saw the body, and she never saw the body either. So he could very well still be alive. And Sweet Robin told Littlefinger to have Marillion's tongue cut out so he'd stop singing, but Littlefinger refused. Sansa says, oh, it's because he needs to confess. But if Littlefinger's going to execute him anyway, not really. And as well, I actually had the thought that maybe Littlefinger and Marillion are sort of working together, and that they're actually putting Marillion somewhere that him singing echoes up into Sweet Robin's room, sort of like in King's Landing, how Varys has all of the peepholes. Maybe it's like that.
I don't really see
so no one else hears it.
I don't really see what the point of keeping Marillion alive. He's the only witness. He's the only witness that
it keeps
that Littlefinger killed Lysa.
Robert. Sansa's a witness too.
Oh,
Yeah,
true.
but Sansa has another matter. I agree that it would be weird to keep him alive, especially since, I mean, how much he's suffered. Obviously, even if he was working with Littlefinger before, is that you, Sarah, who put this on the Google Doc about him being a spy for Littlefinger and following Cat from King's Landing? No, that's Bina too.
Bina did that.
Yeah,
actually, it makes a lot of sense.
It makes sense
because if that's the case and they're already teamed up, then it does make sense for Littlefinger to get him out of there and to do that. And
but yes and no. Okay, so the idea is that Littlefinger had hired Marillion to follow Cat from King's Landing and to keep an eye on her, and that's why he went up to the Eyrie in the first place. And then he stayed there to keep an eye on Lysa and Lysa, and Littlefinger told him to stay there.
Is there any evidence of that?
No, I don't think there is. It would make sense, but I don't think there is any evidence. However, even if that's the case, I don't believe keeping him alive would make any sense, because even if he was working with Littlefinger before, he had like his fingers cut off and stuff, broken, and he's blind, isn't he?
Yeah.
Did anyone ever see it, or were they just told that happened?
That he committed suicide?
No, about having fingers broken and being blinded.
I think the fact that he's blinded is fairly explicit, and we see it. Like, I mean, at some point he's brought before Nestor Royce, is it, for the trial? And I mean, the whole confession thing. I think he's dead.
Yeah, I hadn't heard the theory that Marillion was a spy of Littlefinger. It kind of makes a bit of sense, though, because he uses Dontos as a spy, and having someone in the Eyrie to I guess, to woo Lysa and keep her from being married.
Keep an eye on things.
Yeah, keep an eye on things, but also keep her from being married to another suitor is kind of, that does work as part of his plan, his long-term plan. But the idea that he would keep him alive after witnessing Lysa's murder seems nonsensical to me, especially with how quickly he kills Dontos after getting the use out of him. It makes much more sense that he would off him.
True, but actually, I think he does sort of still have a use for Marillion, because you know how they're saying that Sweet Robin's seizures are getting worse in this chapter and have been since Lysa passed. Actually, epilepsy, which does have seizures, that's the main symptom of it. It does get worse with sleep deprivation, and constantly hearing Marillion singing every single night is meaning that Sweet Robin does have sleep deprivation because he's not able to sleep properly, which does mean his seizures are getting worse, he's getting sicker, he's more likely to die from it.
Maybe, but I feel like there's an easier way to deprive him of sleep than to keep Littlefinger alive and singing in the walls.
And as well, actually, Sansa in this chapter says they already have a sick heir for the Vale, let alone a crazy one. So also having Sweet Robin, having people think he's going mad because he's hearing a dead person singing, is a way to ruin his legitimacy or how willing they'd be to follow him as a ruler.
I think there's not much you still need to do so that Sweet Robin is basically a fucked up child. I mean, his mother has been murdered. He was already not really a normal kid before that, and now he's sleeping sometimes with Alayne, sometimes in his bed. He has massive epilepsy. I don't think you need to add hallucinations to. I mean, I don't think you need to make him believe he's hearing a dead singer to make it worse. Like, it's already not a pretty picture.
Yeah, I think the death of his mother is obviously far more devastating. That's more than enough to give him nightmares. And even just the wind rushing against the rocks, that could be interpreted by a little child as the singing of the singer. And also it's like, within the text, creates this dark shadow of this dark cloud over his head about about his fate under Littlefinger, whether he'll be his next victim. But another mystery we get in this chapter is the tapestries that Cersei sends. It's kind of a mystery. It's like something that the fans have speculated over because it's been referred to a few times in the text. So you get the scene of Cersei sending the tapestry, you get Littlefinger speculating about it, when it's going to arrive, and then I think in a future chapter it possibly arrives, and people don't know what the tapestries are, like why they're so important to the story. Do you guys have any theories?
So I'm not going to claim credit for this. I read this somewhere. But it's kind of an interesting theory. It might be a little too off the wall, but I thought it was kind of interesting. These tapestries are not, they're not tapestries of kings or anything like that. They're Baratheon tapestries, charting the history of the Baratheons. Of course, all Baratheons have black hair. So is this a situation where Littlefinger is basically trying to create Littlefinger is trying to create the sort of awareness, this just kind of general mind share that Baratheons, of course, have black hair, so that when he does decide to make his move, potentially to position Sansa or whoever else as a potential sort of claimant to the throne or something like that, he has sort of this clear some evidence that he can lay out in against essentially the Lannisters. Though I think I'm not sure if that's worth it. I'm not sure that people would care at that point. But that's the only thing I can think of.
Yeah,
that would be relevant.
Exhibit A. Yeah, that's the theory.
The real question is, why would Cersei be dumb enough to send something proving that she cheated on her husband, her children are boss, they have no claim to the throne, to someone else instead of destroying it?
That's a great question, but she did do that, so why? Yeah.
There's a precedent for Cersei's stupidity.
There
just
is.
one.
There really is.
But that's the theory I saw. The only other theory I saw was that. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to ask, do you think it's the Targaryen paintings with all of the dragons? Because Robert Baratheon never showed an interest in them, and Cersei doesn't either. And they were down in the crypt, not the crypts, in the bottom of his landing under the Red Keep, whether it's that, and Littlefinger wants those sent to him.
But why? I mean, why would he want them?
That way he can curry favour with Dany if she ever actually comes over, or anyone else.
Like a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Hey, look,
because that's something Dany would actually really like. No, it's just like, hey, these are in great condition. They're like from your granddad. You'll love them. Here you go. Great present.
Yeah, actually, the idea that they are from, Baratheon tapestries, I think I'm not sure it would, it makes sense, but like, wouldn't Mia be already proof? I mean, he has plenty of other proof he could have. And also, I don't think anyone cares at this point.
And as well, there's the book that actually states that Baratheons generally have blue eyes and black hair. I'd get that book, the genealogy book, that also says Lannisters always have gold hair, golden hair and green eyes. I'd get that one.
But the small folk can't read.
Yeah, but do you think they will care about a tapestry that shows only black-haired Baratheons? I don't.
Could you imagine all of the small folk with black hair going up and being like, I'm a Baratheon now? Like, give me those.
Yeah, I don't really have any ideas, but the only other theory I saw was that it might be used to smuggle something valuable out of King's Landing. Like, it's not the tapestry itself, but it's containing something. Or also it could just be something as simple as showing the passage of time. Like, it's showing the tapestry leaving, arriving. It's just showing the movements, the geological movements around Westeros. Like the connective tissue between the different storylines.
We're counting by tapestry time now. That's
units of tapestry.
The point we're at.
Do you think Littlefinger's going to flip the tapestry so it's just like, oh man, get it from Cersei on the cheap and then sell it for a really high marked up price to make a profit?
Yeah, hey, he's a businessman. He's looking for every opportunity to get a little gold here and there. That makes sense.
No plot is too small.
Yep.
Okay, one last thing I wanted to say from Venus' notes was that, she quotes, "But that was a lifetime ago when she was a stupid little girl," from Sansa's own thoughts. And she says that none of the Sansa haters are harder on her than that she is herself. And that's nice because we will see that kind of thoughts in the next 2 chapters as well, which is a nice little parallel between the 3 chapters that we have today. That I need to grow up. I'm not a stupid little girl anymore. Brienne thinks that way too, and Bran also.
Yeah,
as we will see.
Yes.
That is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think just in general. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think it's really interesting to see Sansa's role in these chapters, because it's kind of like she's been suffering in captivity for so long, but she's kind of getting to be in her element, which is what she's been groomed for, which is to be the head of a household, and she's really good at it. She's really good at organizing things, managing personal relationships, managing staff, and she's assumed a fairly, strong kind of power over affairs. People defer to her and ask for her advice, especially around Robert, because she obviously has such a strong hold on her as reminding him of his mother. But I think it also shows how good her political and her observational skills are. Like, she's able to observe the different relationships between the Lords Declarant. She seats them in a way that favors Littlefinger. And she's able to suss out. Like, she doesn't necessarily have a very active role, but her observational skills, which she's cultivated in King's Landing, I think, are really pronounced in this chapter.
It's kind of interesting to see, obviously, in this chapter, this is our first where the chapter title is Alayne, right? And in general, that is how she refers to herself. And I think it's interesting how obviously in some ways it feels like Sansa's identity has kind of been unmoored in a way. It's kind of in flux. She's not precisely sure even who she is. She even has a line in there she mentions, obviously, in this fear that Jon Royce will recognize her. She says, Lord Royce will never know me, she thought. Why, I hardly know myself. So she's not really even sure who she is anymore. But I think the kind of positive spin on this is that I'm not sure that Sansa has known who she is since Eddard died, basically. I feel like that from that point onward, she's kind of been in this point of evolution, transformation, trying to readjust her worldview to better suit her new circumstances. And this is the moment where I feel like she's starting to kind of put the pieces back together into a new Sansa that's being built up. So
Yeah,
I think that's the kind of positive spin.
it's like she's able to rebuild herself from scratch.
Yeah, and who she has been previously, since her father's death, has been defined by who she's surrounded by and how she's treated by them.
Yes,
Even
that is true.
Even as a reader,
Yeah.
I struggle to on what to call her. Do I call her a Sansa or do I call her Alayne? Because even she sort of struggles to identify herself. And I like the beginning where she talks about the dye running out and what is she going to do when it runs out, and her hair changes back. And I thought it was an interesting illustration of that idea that the Alayne mask has to be continually painted over Sansa, that she's continually pushing down this other side of herself that's no longer safe. It's not safe to be Sansa anymore, so she has to be this other thing.
I know. But also, how long is she going to be Alayne for? And do they actually have more hair dye or hair dye coming? Because when she's out, she's going to be exposed very, very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can the hair dye last until we get the winds of winter? That's the question. Let's see.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, if she's like my mom's hair grows quite quickly, like 3/4 of an inch in a month. If she's like my mum, she'd need to be dyeing it almost constantly so people wouldn't know that her hair isn't brown.
Yeah.
And she'd burn through it really quickly. So.
It's a really good chapter, though. I think it's just like quintessential Game of Thrones, court intrigue, plotting, deception, the interplay between appearance and reality. You've got the family politics of the lords and then how that affects the world politics around them. And we see the brilliance of Littlefinger's scheming in display. You see Sansa kind of coming into her own, becoming a new person. But I think my favorite bit of the chapter is this line that Littlefinger utters when he's kind of mentoring, giving some lessons to Sansa. And he says, in the Game of Thrones, even the humblest pieces can have wills of their own. Sometimes they refuse to make the moves you've planned for them. Mark that well, Alayne. It's a lesson that Cersei Lannister still has yet to learn. And I think that's interesting because it sort of reflects both on Cersei and Littlefinger. Cersei isn't doing what Littlefinger has planned for her, and Littlefinger isn't doing what Cersei has planned for her. It's all about perspective. Everyone thinks they're the player, they're the one in charge, but they're often being used by people they're not aware of. And like even the smallest piece can do something you don't intend to do it. All these marginal characters, and I think we've sort of talked about it before. A Feast for Crows is all of these secondary characters. It's Brienne and these characters that haven't have POVs that are suddenly thrust into the limelight or that have suddenly got their subjectivity, having to deal with the aftermath of all of the deaths of these great figures, and now they're the ones making moves and affecting the world around them.
Yep. Even Sansa in the first book had so few chapters, like so few.
I wish she had more in this book. These are like some of the best chapters, but we only get 3 in the whole book.
Yeah. That's exactly what I was going to say. Like 3 Sansa chapters, and each one of them will like, oh my god, this is so good. That's why we love these books. I mean, that's why I love them at least. And this is frustrating.
Guys, we have a lot of Daenerys chapters to get through. Okay, so there's no time for Sansa.
Well, that said, should we move on to Brienne, or do you have more to say?
I just have one last thing to note. I thought it was interesting the part where Littlefinger obviously is talking about how he does not want to go rule Harrenhal because it's this cursed, awful place that's impossible to manage. But I have never felt comfortable in the Eyrie. I feel like it's one of the most disturbing and unhappy places to be in all of Westeros, which is notable, right? Because the Vale itself is beautiful. We get this little paragraph at the start of the chapter of how beautiful it is. And if there was a place in Westeros I would want to live, probably be the Vale, but the Eyrie itself is just so, there's all these comments about how it's just this deafening silence that you feel, and of course there's all these ghosts and uncomfortable horrors that obviously Robert's experiencing, and that Sansa has experienced in the past, and that Tyrion experienced when he was sitting in the sky sail. Like, every perspective we've had, I've never felt comfortable in the Eyrie. It's one of the places that I just am never happy to be in the books.
Yeah, it's one of the most high fantasy aspects of the book as well. Just this this impossible castle above the clouds. And the emptiness and the silence of it. It does feel quite eerie. It doesn't seem like a comfortable place to live. It feels very eerie. Exactly. There you go. It doesn't feel like a comfortable place to live.
I think it could be. Like, I think at the time of Robert and Ned, when they were fostering over there, squiring, and John Arryn, they were. I think it was a much happier place.
There's a striking line at the beginning.
And as well it had young people to make it happier and all the joy that comes with that, whereas now it's a lot sadder.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, can you hear a cat purring? Yes?
No,
I don't think so.
Oh, that's good. She can say that.
Yeah, Duncan, you were saying.
It's quite striking at the beginning where Sansa's looking out from the window, and it feels very, again, fantasy. It sort of reminded me of the Princess in the Tower chapter with Ariane. It's like this, this princess imprisoned. She's safe, but she can't escape this tower, and she looks out and sees the birds and wishes she could fly. So it's kind of like that analogy that the Hound gives, that she's this bird in this gilded cage.
Yeah.
And we see a bit of like Stockholm syndrome with her and Littlefinger. Like, she is frightened by him and his creepiness, and she's worried for sweet Robin. She fears what he might do to him, but she's slowly becoming. She's obviously dependent upon him, even though he's to some extent her captor, but she's slowly becoming aligned with his mentality and his goals. Like, she sees him as the best horse to bet on.
Yep. Do you think that's because he's proven that he will protect her and not hurt her? Like, yes, he's creepy, but he's not physically abusing her like Joffrey did? Possibly,
and I guess she sees him as a way to hurt the Lannisters and reclaim her home and things like that.
Yeah.
And I don't think she's realized this yet, but she has a lot of leverage over Littlefinger that she can use in due time. She is his weak spot.
She does.
That's true.
And as well, in this chapter, he says that he doesn't want porridge for breakfast. He wants a kiss. And she's like, okay, I'll be a good daughter. I'll give you a kiss on the cheek. Done.
Yeah, she's aware.
So he might make advances, but she's sort of just twisting them a little bit. So it's not giving him everything he wants, just a little bit.
She is aware of the power that she wields over him, in both the sense that she's witnessed a lot of his crimes, but also that she has this strange hold on him, or he has this strange fixation on her that she can leverage. But it is dangerous. It is very creepy, especially the way he switches between wanting her to act like his daughter, but then also give him kisses. It's very weird and incestuous. It's almost like he wishes she was the daughter he'd had, but also to be a young Catelyn. It's very creepy. And it's very almost like you get these two sides of Littlefinger, the very graceful and cat-like and suave Littlefinger, but this very dark, creepy Littlefinger as well, that he's able to just somehow switch between and coexist.
Yeah. Yes.
I wouldn't trust that guy.
No.
Would anyone?
Ned would.
Yes, he would.
And Cersei would. Actually, in this chapter, before we move on, because I know you wanted to, Nerdy, Littlefinger, right with the quote you said earlier, in that same paragraph, Littlefinger actually says that he might need to remove Cersei from the board sooner than he had planned.
Time to activate Plan Tapestry, so that's the way to go.
Yep.
He just rolls it up and whacks her off a ship or something.
So I think that in Winds we might actually see something happen to Cersei, and that Littlefinger played a role in that, potentially, or that there will be an attempt against Cersei's life.
Maybe. She's in pretty dire straits at the moment, though. He might not need to do anything.
I know, he did say that if she doesn't end up killing herself, so
Right.
that'd work too.
Like, she's too
He does control
unstable.
the kettle black, so his hand is still there.
Oh, of course.
Kingsland.
Yeah. But possibly, she's too unstable. Like, she's messing up the board too much, and he needs to neutralize her.
Let's move on to Brienne, if that's all right with all of you. After Sansa 2, we move to Brienne 4. This takes place 2 days later on March 25th, and we skip back 2 chapters and 70 pages. And Zach is here.
Yes, I am. All right. So, we've rejoined Brienne and Podrick on their endless hunt for Sansa as they travel through Crackclaw Point with their stalwart guide, Nimble Dick Crab, leading the way. Nimble Dick tells stories of crabs, kings, and squishers. He sings songs and tries his hand at stealing some gold to no avail. Brienne tells her own story of Sir Galladon, the perfect knight, who refused to use his magic sword, Fair Maid, on a mortal man. Brienne dreams of all the false suitors she has beaten in combat, and Sir Jaime fastening a rainbow cloak about her shoulders. The whole time, it rains and rains and rains. As the group passes by the dire den of the Bruins, Podrick spots a lone rider on the road. They decide not to bother with him for now and continue forward, struggling through dense forest and slippery bog and passing by ancient strongholds each day. Brienne is suspicious of Nimble Dick all along, mentally preparing for the moment when she may need to take his life. Finally, the group comes upon the Whispers, the ruined castle of House Crab. They don't find Sansa or Dantos Holler there. Instead, they find a different fool waiting in ambush. Shagwell, Timian, and Pig set upon the group, quickly dispatching Nimble Dick. As they square off, Timian reports that if Brienne is looking for a Stark girl, she can find one traveling with the Hound to Riverrun. Brienne wields Oathkeeper for the first time and makes short work of the brave companions. As he pleads for his life, Brienne forces Shagwell to dig a grave for poor Nimble Dick. Shagwell makes one last attempt at her life with a sharpened rock, but Brienne has none of it. She knocked aside his arm and punched the steel into his bowels. Laugh, she snarled at him. He moaned instead. Laugh, she repeated, grabbing his throat with one hand and stabbing at his belly with the other. Laugh, she kept saying it over and over, until her hand was red up to the wrist and the stink of the fool's dying was like to choke her. But Shagwell never laughed. The sobs that Brienne heard were all her own. After they lower Nimble Dick into his grave, Brienne tosses 2 golden dragons down with him. Why did you do that, my lady, sir? Asked Pod. It was the reward I promised him for finding me the fool, Brienne explains. Those words are greeted by the laughter of Sir Hyle Hunt, tasked with following Brienne by Lord Randall Tarley. Brienne makes her plan to follow the Hound clear, and the 2 cover Nimble Dick's grave with dirt as the moon rises and forgotten kings whisper. So yeah, this is a chapter. It certainly is a chapter in this book. I think in many ways it is the culmination of the aimlessness of Brienne's sort of doomed journey through the Riverlands searching for Sansa. So I guess my question is, do you guys like this chapter? Do you enjoy this moment in Brienne's story and in the story in general? What are some of just the thoughts on this moment in time?
I really didn't enjoy it the first time because it did feel really aimless, but I found that I actually enjoyed reading it this time, especially in isolation. Like, I think it works kind of like a cool, creepy fairy tale just on its own, just venturing into these primordial woods and just really not knowing what they're going to find, the ruined castles, really cool, eerie descriptions of the woods. You get the little folklore about the squishes and some information about Tarth. Yeah, I think it does go on way too long. Like, I think you could have cut it down a bit, but I enjoyed the scene. Thought the battle was cool. You get a bit more about Brienne and what it means to really, the difference between training to be a knight and actually having to commit violence. So yeah, I liked it.
Can't flinch. Got to do it.
Yeah.
Yep. And we all know I'm a Brienne fangirl, so of course I liked it. But I think this chapter is one of the ones that even reading it the first time and reading it again now, it still makes me very apprehensive. Like, I am like so full of suspense reading it. I'm like, I know what's going to happen, but still, I'm like, man, when's it going to happen? Be careful. Yeah, totally corny. And with the horseman riding in the background the whole time, it just reminded me of The Princess Bride, reading it again now.
Mm. Oh, yeah.
Because having someone following the whole time, and then at the end of the chapter it ended up being the man in black, but it's not the man in black, it's Hyle Hunt instead of Wesley, so yeah.
That's disappointing.
I know, but like, I'm a hardcore Jamie Brienne shipper, but still I'm like, Hyle Hunt, I want to see what happens with you. Are you going to like expand your role? Am I going to get second lead syndrome? Are you going to be my new favorite? I need to know. Give me more. So George, that's a message for you. Like, George,
I feel like he's going to betray her at some point. Don't know why, just a feeling.
Well, I don't know. He might end up like sacrificing his life for her because she doesn't trust him anymore and doesn't trust a lot of people anymore, whether it like that's the end for him, and it's to be like, I know you don't trust us, but maybe you should open up more. Like the same as Nimble Dick Crab, she didn't trust him the whole time, which is good because she shouldn't. That's how you get yourself hurt, and how you have other people hurt you and giving them that opportunity.
And I don't expect that feeling to go away. You know, this chapter ends with her saying, you know, posthumously to Nimble Dick, I'm sorry that I never trusted you. I don't know how to do that anymore. So it seems like that's pretty much the state for Brienne now.
Yeah, I mean, it's tragic, but she was right not to trust him. And he was really shady, and he
shady,
wasn't...
and he was probably just going to drop her off there as well and leave, like he did to
completely.
the other guy.
Like
that's what he was going to do.
He did send the three guys there knowing there wouldn't be any ships, so he wasn't a good guy, and she was right not to trust him, but it's tragic how in the end he was telling the truth about this one thing, and he died.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. Why does Nimble Dick undertake this mission, considering he knows that the people who he betrayed are going to be there? Did he get greedy? I was kind of wondering if maybe he wanted to see his home again, or wanted to go on this kind of fairy tale quest just for his own curiosity, or I don't know.
He knew it was a goose chase, though. So, like, even though he's leading Brienne there, he knew that she's not going to find what she wants to find.
I do like that theory, though, Duncan. I like the idea that, and I'm gonna, add some color to this that might not be, obviously accurate, but it's like Nimble Dick, his whole life he has not been able to kind of live the stories that he has been telling, and now he gets this last chance to do so, and he's willing to do that so that he can be a part of some kind of fairy tale. I like that. I like that as a motivation.
Yeah. It is a big part of the chapter that they're retelling these stories from their respective homelands and the different heroes that they've looked up to and the stories that have informed, their different sort of provincial, upbringings and values and rituals. And so we get the horror story about the squishes and the hero of the Crackclaw Point, and I liked all of that local history because we get the big epic stories that sort of overshadow the Seven Kingdoms, the Long Night, Aegon's Landing, the landing of the Andals, the arrival of the Rhoynar, the Dornish Wars. But these you also have to remind these little tiny communities that have their own stories. And it's important to them, even if it doesn't seem that important to us. And I guess that's one argument for these kinds of chapters. I think ultimately they were a bit indulgent, but a lot of it is interesting kind of world building, if that's why you read fantasy. So there is something you can get out of it.
Yeah, I think that's where I ultimately fall on it. Obviously, this chapter has great atmosphere. The world building is excellent. And, there's some pretty good character stuff with Brienne, and you could say with Nimble Dick too, if you consider him a character worthy of some kind of obviously contracted arc here. But ultimately, like, just the momentum of the story is stifled by it. It doesn't really end up going anywhere. It just kind of pushes Brienne in another direction. I guess the one notable kind of thing that happens is that Brienne is now comfortable with wielding Oathkeeper. That's the kind of big sort of change for her. And obviously this is kind of obviously in reference to the story of Sir Galadin, who would not wield his magic sword. And Brienne is kind of admitting essentially that she will not be the perfect knight. She will kind of do what's necessary. So that's kind of an interesting character beat.
Yeah, and she has killed. Like, that's also the first time she kills a man in combat, isn't she? I mean, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. And well, we also learn that people are still looking for Arya and the Hound, or at least they are still telling the story of like, she was with us and then the Hound got her and now we don't know. So it's also frustrating because it's just too late. Like and Brienne doesn't even think that it can be Arya. She only thinks of Sansa, but it's just very, very, very frustrating to me, this confusion about the information, and it's there but it's not entirely accurate. And I just want to like grab the book and tell her where everyone is.
I know it's really
but as well, especially with reading these chapters, I actually went and looked up a map because I wanted to figure out how far away Runestone was from the Eyrie. And then I saw at the bottom they had Cracklaw Point, and I'm like, they're so close. It's on the map of the Vale. They're so close, and he's not going to get there, and she's going the wrong direction now.
It's interesting to read this after the Arya and Sansa chapters in which they've changed their names, because we realize that Arya and Sansa no longer exist. And even later in the book, we realize that the figure of the Hound no longer exists. So Brienne is essentially spending this whole book chasing the ghosts of the characters from the first three books. These people no longer exist to any real degree. They're just kind of, they're just not there. She's just wandering around trying to make sense of the carnage of the first three books, trying to restore some kind of order. I mean, I guess that is the knight's job. She's trying, it's not entirely pointless in the sense that she kills three really bad people. She does slay the monsters at the end of the fairy tale. So she does, serve some kind of legal service in this story, and also for her character, she commits her first kill, which is a big moment, obviously. So in that regard, I think it's almost like a midway arc. It's sort of the culmination of the first half of Brienne's story, I guess, and now she has to like double back and reevaluate what her goals are. But it is very frustrating, I guess, from a narrative trajectory point.
Kind of connecting it to that kind of really good point you mentioned about the fact that she's chasing the ghosts of these other characters. I almost feel like, to an extent, she's also kind of chasing a version of herself that's not going to survive this journey. I think that's kind of what Brienne's story is ultimately. When she was a kid, she kind of wanted to be, a maiden who would attract suitors, and then she wanted to be a knight. And I'm not sure that she will ever truly get to be either of those things, at least not in the idealized form. So she, too, is kind of becoming someone that she wasn't.
Yeah, and like her whole story in this book is full of flashbacks to when she was younger and more innocent. And this very chapter, it has a part of her that changed her, with how Septa Rowella told her that, yes, these men are being very nice to you, but it's not, and calling you beautiful and graceful, but it's not because you are. It's because they are trying to curry favor with your father. You need to be careful of it and not believe everything people tell you. And then I think this chapter really highlights how much the people that raised her actually shaped who she is now. Because as well, they have, she mentions the master at arms who trained her in how he forced her to go out to the butcher because he didn't think she'd be able to kill a man in a fight. And he had a friend who died because he couldn't kill someone and had half a second delay. So Sir Goodwin sent her to her father's butcher to kill lambs and piglets. She did it. She didn't like it, but she did it and was able to, but he still wasn't convinced. And I don't think she was convinced that she could either until this chapter.
Sir Goodwin is low-key one of the best characters in this whole story.
It's so I mentioned in the Sansa chapter that she's like, when I was a girl, I was silly, and now I'm not that anymore. So it's the same thing here. Brienne is remembering when she was naive and not wary of men like she is now. And one specific thing that made me sad is that she thinks to just stop and confront the rider who is following them. But what stops her from doing that is the idea that she will look like a fool if the man turns out to be just a singer or one of Brune's men, like Crabbe is suggesting. And that's sad. Like she doesn't trust her own instincts because she's afraid to look like a fool.
And as well, I think it's probably not just look like a fool, it's to have people mock her for it, because that's what has happened before. And she's afraid of having that happen again, which is absolutely fair enough and very understandable. Yeah. But it's also not a wise decision, because what if that was the enemy's man who was scouting for them? She wouldn't know. She'd let them go, and then, like, I know, the next day they captured and murdered or killed in a fight because she didn't trust her instincts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading a good analysis of Brienne, and they were talking about it's a traditional heroic quest in a lot of ways, but one of the biggest obstacles she has to overcome, along with all of the regular obstacles of the quest arc, is her gender. Like, no one takes her seriously. Everyone just treats her with disdain or mockery, or they don't cooperate with her even if they're on the same size as Randall Tarley. Or, you know, the worst of it is what we get with the bloody mummers. They're like threatening to, it's not like a man. It's a different set of circumstances. If it was a man, they would threaten to kill or torture him, but here they're threatening to sexually assault her really viciously. And it's something that she has to contend with the whole book, the gender norms in Westerosi society, that idea of the ideal masculine martial prowess that she is challenging is so viciously contested by everyone, you know, relatively normal seeming characters all the way up to these monsters here. It's just something that just continually hammers at her, and it's really it's changing her. She says she can't trust people anymore. She makes decisions against her interest because she's worried she'll look like a fool. It's a big theme, I think, throughout her journey of trying to be
the most frustrating part.
To even be treated as an equal, she has to convince people that she's more than worthy, that she has to convince them more than a man would, whereas a man, they just take it at face value. But with her, she needs to prove it in a lot of situations. Like with Jaime, she had to.
Yeah. The most frustrating part, too, is that it's not something she can ever really overcome holistically. You know, she's not going to be able to change the norms of the whole society. It's just not going to happen. She may, with, you know, great strenuous difficulty, convince certain people that she is capable and worthy and that she, you know, should be respected. But she's going to have to deal with this thing her whole life. It's not going away.
Although I think the theme of
I
think the theme of folk tales in this chapter was interesting in the sense that you could sort of imagine a future folktale about Brienne being told, you know, this one of the few female knights going around and in post-war Riverlands, you know, defeating the bloody mummers, trying to find this girl that she never finds. It could make a good song. So that idea of, I don't know, some kind of female knightly role model could have some kind of positive effect down the line, especially if you consider how songs are one of the few, you know, powerful cultural cachets in Westeros. And assuming she doesn't meet a grisly end that in which it becomes a cautionary tale to step outside the gender norms, which it may very well. So we'll see how the singers interpret it.
In Westeros, especially for the small folk, it's like an oral history is how they tell their history. So it might well happen that she needs to find a singer to go along with them, or Pod needs to turn into one.
Yes, he's ready. Let's have him do that.
Yep, we don't know whether or not he has a nice voice, though. He might have a great voice, but he's just too shy to sing.
Speaking of that, Brienne wanted to sing too, but she doesn't get to. That's another little sad Brienne.
Because she doesn't want to look a fool.
She never... Yeah, poor honey. And, like, she wanted to sing for the guy she loved, but wasn't able to before he was killed.
By the great guy Stannis. What a great guy he is.
I think you mean by brother Stannis. That's, yeah.
Exactly. What do you guys think is up with the squishers? Are they real? Do you guys think that's a real?
Yes.
A real thing? Yeah.
When I first read them, is it the Isle of the Gods, Isle of Faces, one of those ones that Howland Reed went to? I'm not sure if I remember it correctly, but weren't there like frog fishy people there? No, just me. Okay.
There were the green men.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that's actually them?
Well, I thought they were the children of the forest, the green men. I don't know.
I thought they were separate. I thought they were more like fish-like. So I thought this is what they were talking about.
On the Three Sisters, we get On the Three Sisters, we get references to people with webbed toes who could possibly be a hybrid of the squishers and human beings. We get lots of references in the World of Ice and Fire to this underwater race of fish people who've terrorized various civilizations, and various civilizations have worshipped them as gods. So it could be an offshoot of that.
I feel pretty confident. Given obviously Martin's proclivities for Lovecraftian mythology, I'm pretty confident there's a lot of weird things going on under the sea. I feel pretty confident about that.
It's a great description by Nimble Dick, though. Just the image of someone who looks like a man, but the closer he gets to you, you realize his head is twice as big, and before you have enough time to run, he's chowing down on you. It's just it's a creepy image.
It's very Witcher. It feels to me.
Yeah.
Actually, it reminds me of The Last Jedi, the frog amphibian people. Yeah.
I was wondering if the squishers are any relation, maybe not literally, but just in terms of lore to the mythology of the others, because there's at one point where they're going through the woods where suddenly everything becomes really silent and eerie and misty and green, and it almost had the feeling of in the Haunted Woods, when the others are near, everything becomes super cold and the ice starts to crack, like that environmental change when evil is near. And even Pod makes the point, this is a very bad place. So I was wondering if that was...
Do you think it's evil as much as something magical?
Yeah, well, something, a malevolent magic is emerging or surrounding us. I think also, we get a similar description also from the previous chapter of the Whispers. So this is like wind rushing through sort of gnarled rock, like holes in rock, the wind whipping through it and creating these interesting eerie sounds.
And the rocks look like faces of various people.
Yeah, which I thought was interesting. And it reminds me of another Martin novel, Dying of the Light, where it's this it's set on this planet out in space, but one of the cities that the inhabitants created was they sort of carved the rocks into instruments, so when the wind rushed through them it created this music, and the city itself has since been abandoned, but whenever you go there you have this eerie music of the previous civilization. So I thought that might have been some of the DNA of that book. Sewn in.
As you said at the start, I feel like as a standalone, this chapter is awesome to read. The atmosphere is excellent, and it's enjoyable in that way. And you obviously see Martin's real skill with these kinds of horrific, really tense situations. But of course, there's a larger story to tell. You don't want to get too lost in, as you mentioned again earlier, self-indulgence in a way.
Yeah.
That I feel like that is a bit of the overriding concern in A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons.
Well, that's why I mentioned this on the previous reread I was on. These chapters very much feel more Duncan Egg than A Song of Ice and Fire. Like they feel like you could take these chapters out because they have such little influence on the rest of the plot in some ways. They don't intertwine with the other characters until the very end, where she meets up with Lady Stoneheart and then Jaime in the next book. But other than that, you could pretty much take these out and create a novella out of them.
Or like he could almost combine a lot of them down into like far smaller chapters or combine chapters all together. But maybe maybe they are so long and they feel like Duncan Egg because he wrote them similarly to it, and he enjoyed writing them, and that's why there are so many and they're so long and they haven't been edited down.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're a product of closing the 5-year gap because they're very much dependent on the very post-war situation in the Riverlands and dealing with that. And it's very much dealing with the loose ends of the War of the Five Kings, hunting down the bloody mummers and so forth. We do get the immortal line, "You mustn't hurt sweet Shagwell, I'm too droll to die."
Yeah. Oh, man.
And also a title drop. She says, "Let them feed the crows," about the dead bloody mummers, which is always good.
I think that's a bit of a stretch for a title drop, but yeah, it's a good.
I'll take it.
Let them feast.
I love it when I'm really bad. I like it when they're like, "This is the title of the book. We need to work it in somehow," and they do it. I'm really bad. I'm just like, "Thank you. No, I know why you called it this," because otherwise I'm like, "Why did you call it that? It makes no sense at all." So it makes me happy.
Just one last point. The article I was reading about Brienne also made the point that A Feast for Crows is the most female-dominated of the 5 books in terms of POVs, because you get Asha, Brienne, Arianne, Arya, Sansa, and Cersei, and they're very much.
Yeah, Cersei.
I think that's most
and
of the.
Daenerys as well.
No, not in A Feast for Crows.
Not in Feast.
Oh, right. Sorry,
Yeah.
I'm
Thankfully.
conflicted. Yeah.
And their storylines are very much dealing with the gender norms in Westeros and overcoming various stereotypes. Like Cersei is very much dealing with internalized misogyny. Brienne she's dealing with bigotry and embodying a masculine role, maybe even some body dysphoria. Sansa using her armor of courtesy and becoming the lady of the castle and all that. Arya trying on different faces, things like that. So yeah, it's interesting the way he plays with gender in this particular book. It's one of the things where I think A Feast for Crows actually does work on its own, even though I think in general Feast Dance is a better reading order in terms of the overall A Song of Ice and Fire narrative. There are actually themes sort of focused on each particular book that he's working with or wrestling with.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I know. I really like Feast because it has almost all of my favorite characters in it. Yes. Actually, I think it does have all of my favorite characters in it. Does it have Davos, actually? That's the only question. I think Davos is in this one, which is the only problem. Otherwise, it has all of them. So,
do we want to jump to Dance and Bran, or anything else about Brienne?
I have one last question. Who do you guys got? Sir Galladon or Clarence Crabb? Who do you see overcoming the other? Crackbones Crab, he's deadly.
But the other one has a magic sword.
But he wouldn't use it.
But he won't use it. Yeah.
yeah, but
it's like going back to Bran. Honor is not useful in combat.
Yeah.
No, but the thing is as well, if you don't use your magic sword, that's how you get killed, and then you're like, well, I had a magic sword, I should have used it, but it's too late if you're dead.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
There's no point having one if you don't use it.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Crackclaw would use every advantage he got. And that's why he'd win.
That's true. Yeah. I think that's funny how there's these two stories about knights or formidable warriors, and in a place like Crackclaw Point, where everything is just gloomy and damp, and it rains, and there are bugs, and there's this guy, and in the Reach and on Brienne's nice little island, it's much more romantic and honorable and like fairy tales, and I think it's quite telling. There's a difference between living in such a place as Crackclaw Point and living in a Reach.
And as well, it's like the Reach had the Knights of Summer, which is what Captain called them because they didn't take things, but also they haven't had to live as harder lives, whereas people in the North have to face harder winters. than people in the south, and they don't have as many luxuries.
Yeah.
So
I think it shows even in the lore. Okay. Anything else?
I just wanted to mention the article I was mentioning was a read of Ice and Fire by Lee Butler, which is on Tor.com.
All right. Last Bran chapter? Ever.
yeah.
Ever.
Ever.
Okay. So after Brienne 4 in Feast, we jump to Bran 3 in Dance. And this is actually a very long chapter that begins 2 days after Brienne for March 27th. And it spans for nearly 2 months. I think it's huge. And we have Duncan for the recap.
It spans 8,000 years, I think. But we'll get into that. All right. So Bran, Hodor, Jojen, and Mira are still dwelling in the caves of the Three-Eyed Crow. The group assigns names to some of the children of the forest, as their actual names can't be pronounced by humans. Bran names one of the females Leaf, as she is always adorned with leaves. Clever. She is one of the few children who can speak the common tongue. Others are called Ash, Scales, Black Knife, Snowy Locks, and Coals. Bran walks into summer to view the winter snows and gathering whites outside the cave, and skin changes into Hodor in order to explore its subterranean chambers. Jojen is growing extremely sad and solemn, and still has fits of shaking. Mira does her best to keep up the spirits of both her brother and Bran. The Three-Eyed Crow teaches Bran how to enter into ravens. He learns that all of the ravens in the cave still contain traces of the children who once occupied them. He also learns how to enter weirwood trees in order to look into the past. The Three-Eyed Crow tells Bran that he was once a lord called Brandon. The children feed Bran a bowl of weirwood paste to awaken his green-seeing gifts. Bran sees his father, Eddard, through Winterfell's heart tree and learns that he can view the past, present, and future through the weirwood's carved eyes. The Three-Eyed Crow tells Bran that he is haunted by his own ghosts, including a brother that he loved, a brother that he hated, and a woman that he desired, but knows from experience that you cannot change the past. When he gets tired, he sends Bran away. Hodor carries Bran to his bed. As he sleeps, Bran's spirit enters Winterfell's heart tree, and he witnesses the following visions. A young Ned Stark with his head bowed, praying to let them grow up close as brothers, with only love between them, and let my lady wife find it in her heart to forgive. Next, he sees a girl who looks like Arya and a younger boy play fighting with branches. Next, he sees a pregnant woman coming out of the black pool praying for a son to avenge her. Next, a slender woman on her toes kissing a knight as tall as Hodor. Next, a pale, dark-eyed youth cutting 3 branches from the weirwood and shaping them into arrows. After that, he sees Lords of Winterfell, tall, hard, stern men in fur and chainmail, and finally a bearded man forcing a captive down on his knees, and a white-haired woman killing the captive with a bronze sickle. So, I was really hyped to discuss this chapter, because I think it's fascinating in what it explores about the nature of time, which is a question that I think Martin is playing with throughout the whole series. And the Three-Eyed Crow tells Bran that one of his lessons is that, quote, "For men, time is a river. We are trapped in its flow, hurtling from past to present, always in the same direction. The lives of trees are different. They root and grow and die in one place, and that river does not move them. The oak is the acorn is the oak, and the weirwood. 1,000 human years are a moment to a weirwood, and through such gates you and I may gaze into the past." And it's interesting because it seems to imply that time is not linear in this world, that it's simply the way that human beings perceive it to be, and that past and present and future all exist at once simultaneously. So what Bran is being taught is that he can, if he can shed his human senses or perceptions, that he can access different points in time. So I guess to begin, I was wondering if you guys had any thoughts about the philosophy of the three-eyed raven that we see here. and if it has any implications for the future of the series.
Well, I have to ask, do you guys think that time is linear in this world, the one we're in now, podcasting about these books? Or is that just our perspective as humans? We're living in the river, just like they are in these books. So is that,
it is just our perspective.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying that as a physicist who's actually doing general relativity, so that's kind of the point. But it's not like that changes anything to the way I live my life.
Yeah. We can't change that perspective. It's not something we can necessarily control.
Yep.
Well, I was reading a little bit about, and I'm definitely not a physicist or anything, but I was reading a little bit about some of the different philosophies of time. And I guess the intuitive idea of time is just this idea that the past is fixed and the present is occurring, and then the future is undecided and the present is becoming the future. But there's also this idea called eternalism, which is kind of what the three-eyed raven seems to be postulating, which is this idea that reality exists as a completed structure, and the notion that time is flowing from past to present to future is an illusion. The only thing that's flowing is our perception or our understanding of reality. And the scariest part of this is that it implies potentially that everything is determined, predetermined. Mm-hmm. Which is it seems to be supported by what the three-eyed crow is saying when he says you cannot influence the past or the future. We can only observe it through the eyes of the weirwood.
Now, is the point there that all things are determined, or simply that Bran and Bloodraven cannot influence things? The people living in those present moments have the capacity to change whatever future is ahead of them. But these guys in the trees just can't. Is that the idea, or in general is everything determined?
Or do you think that they choose not to, and it goes against their code to change it? Because doesn't Bloodraven tell Bran Bran was trying to communicate with Ned, and Bloodraven tells him not to? Or stops him from doing it, so whether they can and they're not supposed to, and that it breaks their code of being a green seer.
I'm sure. I do think that they cannot change the past. I think they're mostly spectators, but knowledge is power, as we know. So the fact that they witness things can help them change things in the present. And so I don't know if Bloodraven is thinking that everything is determined, because otherwise what use is he? Why is he still there? But as to whether they can change the past, I think that would be dangerous for George to go in that direction. To give them that opportunity.
Well, it introduces the notion of science fiction into a fantasy series, which is
that'd be great.
Quite
That's
radical.
Right,
yeah. For especially the tone of the series up until this point has suddenly introduced time travel and time shifts and physics and
maybe it's less than, not quite as much like they can change it, but could they communicate and have the person living in it influence it? So yes, right. Changing it, but it's not necessarily them going into that time point. But because doesn't Reek say that he hears or thinks he hears Bran whispering, and Bran in this chapter says he thought Ned heard him, but Bloodraven says no, we can't communicate with the past.
Yeah, which seems to specifically go against what Bloodraven has, or the Three-Eyed Raven has said, or Three-Eyed Crow, I forget what the show version is and what the book is. I think it's Three-Eyed Crow. Which he says that no, he didn't hear you, your father didn't hear you. But then with Rick or with Theon, we get him hearing the voice of Bran. So he is actually influencing. We don't even know, is he influencing the future or the present or the past? We don't even know from what vantage he is speaking to Theon.
Yeah, which makes it very interesting.
Oh, yes, it does.
Very, very interesting.
My suspicion is that, yes, Bran it will have some capacity to reach out into the world at various points in time and, perhaps not change things, but definitely definitely whisper outward at the very least. I think what Bloodraven is doing here is trying to deflect him from doing such a thing. I think he does not want him to do that. And I think he will.
I think so too.
I guess
I'm in with the hardcore tinfoil.
I guess the notion of influencing the affairs of men, the past or the present, or, you know, being able to speak to your loved ones, that's kind of rendered insignificant in Bloodraven's eyes because he's looking at the totality of the universe. So the affairs of men he regards as like, you know, the fluttering of a moth. They're just atoms in a much greater universe, which directly, you know, goes against what Littlefinger says 2 chapters ago, where he says that even the smallest piece can have an influence on the board, whereas the Three-Eyed Crow seems to be saying that no, we can't have an influence, or these things are fixed, or at least the past is fixed, even if we can access it or learn from it. But
I guess the question then, right, is, you know, what is, maybe there doesn't need to be one, but then what is the purpose of the Three-Eyed Crow if all that they do is observe time, if they can exert no influence over it? What do they accomplish? What is their significance, both in the story and also just, you know, why is this a thing that exists to begin with? You know, what's the motivation to have something like this?
It feels very elemental, like it's not dealing with the affairs of human being. It's dealing with this far loftier notion of, I mean, they call themselves the singers, the people who know the songs of the earth or something. So it's that idea of earth and fire and ice and these elemental forces and this balance. Thank you, Sarah. And these forces that need to be kept in balance. But yeah, again, like if everything's determined, then he doesn't need to keep them in balance. They'll just be kept in balance themselves. It's like hard to figure out where his consciousness is required or where his input is required if things cannot be changed. But maybe there is an imbalance. Maybe things can fall out of balance. Maybe ice can take over and become the dominant force in reality or something like that. But these are far loftier sort of geographies or far loftier elements that we're dealing with.
As well, if they aren't allowed to or cannot change the past, you'd also think that they would not be allowed to change the present, which means that they couldn't send visions to Bran, that Bloodraven would not be able to do that or would not choose to do that. So I think they can.
I think the notion that the future is unchanging, I think, you know, the idea that the past is unchanging can't be changed isn't that controversial, but the notion that the future is unchanging is potentially presented in Dany's visions of the House of the Undying, in which she sees several visions which come to fruition. I mean, you could say that maybe by seeing them, she was drawn to them or drawn to enact them or saw the path that she had to take. And technically there's some potential visions that didn't come to fruition, like she seems to see her unborn son sacking a city or something like that. So that was a future that never occurred, maybe. But also the Maggie the Frog prophecy. It's this possibilities. It's this this destiny that's Cersei is cursed with, and by trying to prevent it, she actually causes it to happen, implying that every decision in the spectrum of reality has actually been factored in, so you can't actually change your fate. All you can do is know it.
Yeah. Interesting.
And in fact, only by knowing it do you initiate the circumstances that will cause it to be fulfilled.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That it's self-fulfilling.
Right. So even the mere observing that the Three-Eyed Crow does and potential actions that he carries out, that in itself is part of some cosmic balance that can't be changed. I think the reason I was interested in this, because there's an I keep saying this is interesting to introduce every point.
But it is interesting. You're so excited about it.
It's,
give me all the weird, crazy stuff.
Well, no, just one way. I'm not sure if it was Martin or just a critic of the books. One way that the books was described was it was a story told in two directions, and I think that supports the notion that it's dealing with this non-linear nature of time, that the structure is told in two directions. The more we learn about, the more that events progress, the more that we learn and uncover about the past events which inform and shape them. So the War of the Five Kings unfolds in parallel with Robert's Rebellion. And this narrative, you could see, is similar to the tree, the image of the tree, in the sense that as its roots grow into the ground, the trunk gets thicker, its branches extend. So even though you can only see one part of it, its different temporal states exist simultaneously. As he says, the acorn is the oak is the acorn. And I think from Bloodraven's perspective, Robert's Rebellion you could interpret as being simply a reenactment of something like the Blackfire Rebellion. So one aspect of eternalism, I think it's Nietzsche who talks about it. He says that time is a process of eternal recurrence. Sorry if this is sounding a bit pretentious. I just find it interesting that time is, even though time is infinite, the number of events is finite, since the materials of the universe are finite. So with that meaning that events will reoccur again and again, since reality is infinite. I don't know if that makes sense, but so the reoccurrence could be, I think, in the books it could be interpreted as rhythmic, like the chorus or the bars of a song. So maybe the song is infinite, but the chords are finite. So you're only going to have the same events playing over and over again in different forms. So I think that's how it works, maybe on a meta level in terms of the way the structure of the book plays out, that we see these stories again and again. Martin says is this one way he describes the book is it's the same old story, the fight for love and glory. So these continual themes of glory and revenge and rebellion and unity and destruction and separation and colonization continually played out again and again on the same stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, when you're eloquent like that, that's when I don't have anything smart to say.
I think that's all I had to say about eternalism. So I'll shut up now.
No, but it's probably very important to talk about it and talk about how all the potential options that George has at this moment and how much we could read into it. But let's read into something else now.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of things where I don't really have an opinion, I'm I just want to read and see what happens, and I love to talk for hours about the characters and what's happening. But when it gets philosophical, that's when I have trouble, and it's all very interesting. But I feel like I cannot have.
That's
really,
okay.
An opinion.
Well, let's switch gears. What did you guys think? What did you guys think of the visions at the end? Have we sort of has the fandom sort of sussed out what each vision means? Do you think?
Do you think that all of the visions happen to Starks?
Well, the first one is almost certainly, or the final vision is almost certainly a period before. They may be Starks, without name. They may have been the predecessors of the Starks, but they are sort of a more primordial first men, it seems.
I think that these visions are actually just kind of a journey through time, through that the eyes of this weirwood, and then we see stuff that we can recognize, and we also see stuff that just happened there, but it doesn't have to be significant,
So the first two visions are obvious, of course. The first one is Ned, talking about Jon and Robb. I hope that they will have, a good relationship, that Catelyn won't hate him for this. Second
good luck with that.
Yeah. Second one is also, I think, pretty clear, right? It's Lyanna and Benjen play fighting.
I would say so.
The third one is weird. This one, there's not. I have no idea what it could be. Exactly, but if you guys have any theories, of course, it's the pregnant woman emerging from the lake or something like that. It's strange. It's a very sort of I don't know, almost like an Arthurian kind of, but like twisted.
Yeah.
But then oh wait. Okay, continue talking. I have an idea.
I read on the Westeros forums that it might be Baron Stark's wife. So this would have been during the time of Duncan Egg, and I think the next book he was meant to go up to Winterfell and do something, and it's during the time when the Starks are fighting against the Ironborn, and the Ironborn kill the Lord of Winterfell. So his wife may have been praying for a son to avenge her husband against the Ironborn.
Seems valid, yeah.
It created a crisis.
Yeah, that's something like that.
It created it, yeah.
About.
So this period, I think it's like maybe 80, 90 years before A Song of Ice and Fire, and it created this crisis of secession in Winterfell. And I think Duncan Egg may enter that story at some point. And then the next vision we get is Duncan Old Man kissing, I think.
Yeah.
Most people.
Almost certainly.
Yeah.
People were, of course, hoping we would get this scene in the next Duncan Egg, the so-called She-Wolves of Winterfell that was supposed to come out a long time ago. It's been 8 years since we last got a Duncan Egg, so I don't know. We'll see, I guess.
The fact that he's described as tall as Hodor seems to also be a pretty blatant clue that Dunk is Hodor's father.
So the next vision is also, not entirely clear. It's a young man, I believe, fletching 3 arrows. Is the next vision. The theory I've heard for this is that it's somehow related to the initial invasion of Westeros by Aegon and his sisters, and it's like him trying to, yeah, exactly.
It's Torrhen's brother.
Yeah, to fletch some arrows to try to kill the dragons, which is not going to work probably. But
you can try.
Certainly can.
Yeah, I think
but of course we know he fails.
I think it was his bastard brother, Brandon Snow, but then Torrhen saw the field of fire and was like, nah, let's just kneel.
Yep. Yeah, because Torrhen was just like, nah, bro, like, don't even try, I'm going to kneel.
Come on, I can make it.
No, you'll kill us all. But I want to try. No. Okay.
And then, of course, the final vision, which seems to take us way back before all these events, to a moment where these first men are binding up someone against the tree and then cutting their throat with a bronze sickle. So some kind of blood sacrifice. That, of course, Bran, notably at the end, he tastes the blood as if it's feeding the weirwood, the heart tree. So, so that's notable that they're doing that.
Wait, first, we're keeping this spoiler free from the show, right? 100%. Not mentioning.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. But it's such a great imagery with that scene. It's so good. Like.
It also shows that
he wrote it so well.
It also shows like the real dark, disturbing side of the North, who we grow fairly affectionate towards because they're the Starks, they're the heroes. But I think we hear before this chapter in the Wolf's Den that the Northmen would sometimes hang the entrails of their enemies among the weirwood trees, and there's this real dark, gruesome backstory to the first men. Very carnal, kind of primordial.
Did Jon see it when he was with the wildlings, or just hear about it?
I don't.
I'm sure about it, I think.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think it was Davos who was told about it in the Wolf's Den.
Oh yeah.
That'd also be very likely. I have a shocking lack of knowledge at the moment. So.
It's late for you, at least.
No, like I've forgotten like everything about everything. Like
it's been too long. Okay, this is completely unrelated. This is the chapter where we have the quote: "A reader lives 1,000 lives before he dies," and etc. And I feel like is this really the one chapter it comes from?
Yeah.
Because I feel like it expanded to being like a well-known quote where we don't really know where it comes from. I mean, not in the fandom, but more globally.
George used it, like it was well known, and then George decided to use it. Why don't we just Google it and try to find out?
I believe this is the only case where it's said in those words, but this sentiment has been obviously expressed in a lot of different situations. I will say though, and this kind of feeds into my larger kind of thinking about this chapter. Obviously, with this line, we all kind of have a positive reaction to it. We're all readers, and we enjoy the fact that as readers, we can experience other stories, other lives, live the lives of other characters. But I kind of had a thought reading this again. Obviously, the connection is made here between a reader and the three-eyed crow and watching through the tree and experiencing other lives. And it doesn't sound, given that, as idealistic as it may appear. It's kind of this idea of, there's this worry, this concern that if you're living too many other lives, you forget to live your own, in that way. And I kind of had that kind of darker interpretation of it this time around. And to me, that's to me is the most significant and resonant part of this chapter. Obviously, all the philosophy on time is interesting. I do find that interesting. But for me, the part that gets me is Bran's character here. I think it's so, and I'll admit I have a soft spot for kids. So, these things kind of hit me harder with any character that's a kid than anything else. But I just feel so bad for him here. There's this one line early on where he's beginning the training, and he says to Mira and Jojen, maybe you could be Greensteers too. Aww. And Mira just says, "No, Bran." And that moment just always breaks my heart because Bran's entire story, he basically just wants to experience things. He wants to have friends. He wants to go on adventures, and he's going to be denied all of that. He has to be. He's been called upon for this other purpose, this other duty, and in a way, this kind of connects to that that determinism point earlier, Duncan. It's like this was always his fate, seemingly, if you buy into that philosophy. And I don't know, it's just it's brutal when you think about who Bran is and all the things that he believes in, and that he will never get to live those things. He'll constantly be living other people's lives and never his own. I find that completely and utterly heartbreaking.
It is so sad because he's such a powerful and in some ways, especially in this chapter, an increasingly sinister character. But he's still such a kid. He's still got such the mentality of a kid. He's so innocent in so many ways. And I think the line that made me choke up a little bit when I first read it was when he's learning about going into the Ravens and wondering if maybe some of his dead siblings have gone into the Ravens, and he sort of fantasizes about all of the Stark siblings could live as ravens in Maester Lewin's rookery, which was like,
God,
no,
kills me.
Little Bran, just like this little nursery rhyme that he's concocted.
Poor kitty. But actually, throughout all of these books, everything that all of the characters want, they don't actually get. Like Bran wanting to be a knight, he doesn't get. Sandor wanted to be a knight too, but in trying to play with Gregor's toy, Gregor horribly disfigured him, and now he completely rejects the idea of knighthood. Sansa just wanted to marry someone and have beautiful children, and she still hasn't gotten that, and instead has gone through massive amounts of abuse. Jon didn't really get a choice, and the choice he did make to become a member of the Night's Watch, it wasn't what he thought it'd be. And then Rob as well, Brienne, she wanted to be a mother, and then how people treated her, she decided that she didn't want that, and then to be a knight instead, and then how people still treat her because of that. Jaime's idea of knighthood and what it'd be like to be a member of the King's Guard, Cersei and how she wishes she was a boy. All of these characters don't get their happily ever after and what they wanted as children.
I mean, isn't it also just it's a story about people growing and learning who they are, and I mean, for some of them it's rather tragic, like for Bran, but for others it's just their natural journey. I mean, for Brienne, it's sad because at some point she wanted to be a mother, but that's also what she perceived that she should be, and not necessarily what she actually wanted to be. And I mean, it's a tough world, so that can be said for basically everyone, that no one lives just the perfect lives.
That is true.
They had envisioned.
That is true, and obviously this is
just not possible.
This is obviously very true to life. Life is full of dreams and disappointments, and not quite getting to where you want to be in a lot of cases. And you could, as you guys say, you could apply this broadly to every character. I think that they all experience, or most of them experience, some form of tragedy along their journey. I think for me, what's significant about Bran in particular is that it's just that he feels, and again, all the circumstances of these characters are obviously going to limit their potential in some way. Being, as we talked about with Brienne, being a woman in this world, has a huge amount of limitations in terms of what you want to achieve. That's true. But I think with Bran, he just has such a complete and utter lack of agency of where his life is going. From the moment that he is obviously quite literally paralyzed, he is set on a path that he has no, essentially it feels, and maybe this isn't true. Maybe he will find some way to, change things for the better, but it feels like from that point, he's doomed to be this one thing. And while there might be some kind of, nice things about that, of course, Reader getting to live 1,000 lives, Bran's going to get to live a lot of lives. He's going to get to experience a lot of things, but he's never going to get to live his own life, which is it's brutal. And taking it to another level, obviously this is kind of the classic, existential crisis of like the immortal person who's going to live on well past everyone they've known. I think that's mentioned. Bran worries about that. Maybe I don't want to live after you've gone. He kind of makes that point. And that only makes it more severe that he's going to have to carry on and feel these feelings and feel the fact that all the people he's known have left him behind. That's brutal too, though. If he does eventually kind of assimilate to this other understanding of time, maybe they're always with him. I don't know. It's complicated, but yeah, I find Bran's story incredibly tragic. So,
and this chapter, you really get a sense of how unstable he's becoming in his sense of self. Like he can't quite, especially his sense of morality in terms of the way he's manipulating Hodor. We get a scene of him seemingly being in summer while he's eating the flesh of a white. It gets really eerie. There's one passage where he's not sure whether he's a boy looking at a raven or a raven looking at a boy. And I think that's reflected in a lot of the language of the chapter is very elemental, especially sort of the beginning and some of the interstitials. It describes the passing of the moon, going from a full moon to a crescent moon to an empty sky, the cold air, the darkness of the caves, the rotting body, the wet coarseness of the vines. And it seems to be like it's a point of view that's not really reducible to a person. It's almost like just the point of view of nature. It's like his spirit's kind of floating free and observing this and that, but it's not, as you say, Zach, it's not really located in any one person. It's sort of split and become fluid. And in that sense, it's no longer accountable to some of the morality and some of the social norms of human beings and society.
Yeah. I still think he's accountable for his actions of forcing himself into Hodor, even though Hodor's really acting like a beaten child or animal trying to get away from Bran when Bran's trying to get into his mind. And that's Hodor in this chapter is who I feel sorry for more than Bran.
I think the fact that Bran feels like no one can ever know that he's doing that is proof that he knows that's wrong.
He knows, and he thinks it's wrong, and he doesn't want anyone to know about it.
Yeah.
It's true. And there's,
that's he knows it's wrong and he continues to do it. That's
even worse in some ways.
Yeah. So honestly, I think if Bran keeps on going down that track by putting himself into Hodor and forcing Hodor to do things, I don't think he'll be redeemable.
Do you guys
think that's fair to say? Yeah.
Sorry. Do you guys think Bran might end up being a villain or a monster? That would be the ultimate subversion of taking this really innocent young boy and making him the unwitting instrument of evil?
I kind of think that he will be, because if R'hllor and Melisandre are the good guys, and actually down in their cave in this one, everything's dark and shadowy, and Bloodraven says the strongest roots are rooted in dark places of the earth. Darkness will be your cloak, your shield, and your mother's milk. Darkness will make you strong. Whether they're actually evil and not on the side we thought they were.
So metal.
Yeah.
I want to
think
that. Yeah, I would like to think that it's more complicated than that, and that it's not just a magic you're using that's telling if you're a bad guy or a good guy. And I'm hoping for some redemption, but I really don't know where all the ice against fire thing is going. I don't know if Bloodraven and the Children of the Forest are the good guys. It's just maybe I mean, they're not like Melisandre and the Red God, but maybe they are also working against the others. It's just we cannot know.
Yes.
It could just be that there's no true good or evil, and that like everything, like they're in a grey zone, that they do things that we think are morally wrong. However, they are going to be fighting against the others.
Yeah,
so
that
we'll
could
side with them
completely.
because of that.
Yeah,
that's where I sit on it ultimately. This story is not about clear. Obviously, as we've heard 1,000 times, the story is not about clear blacks and whites. Good and evil is just not a thing that Martin's interested in exploring, and I think that is as true of the sort of metaphysical conflicts as it is of the more mundane ones that we obviously deal with. I think these are just different magical forces with their own sort of agendas and beliefs and standards of morality, and they're all kind of working toward their purpose. And I don't think there's any kind of, we can ascribe our morality upon it, but I don't think that it's ever going to be that clear, which side is the good one. Obviously, the Red God, we have no reason to believe that that's a good thing. We have no reason to believe that there's anything, righteous about that cause either. So,
especially not when they burn people.
Yeah.
So.
Indeed.
Well, I guess they would argue that human notions of good and evil are kind of immaterial or petty, that they're fighting a much loftier war or balance, this cosmic balance between fire, ice, or whatever. So perhaps they see themselves as fighting for the side of an ultimate good, but having to do some pretty dark things in order to achieve that. Draw upon some pretty powerful, sinister magics in order to have enough power to hold the others at bay.
Plus, as well, like what they'll consider moral will be defined by their culture. Like different cultures consider different things with morality. So,
but it's a great chapter, and it's got a lot of lore in it. We hear about the origins of the ravens originally being walked into and actually singing the message or speaking the message, and that's the origin of the Raven Postal Service. We get more about the children themselves. We learn about how the green seeing works, a bit more about skin changing, and ultimately I think it's almost like a third party has been introduced into the story. Like, we've been hearing about the children bits and pieces, but now we really, this is the first chapter we get the full extent of their power and the depth and how ancient they are and how they've always been a kind of force in this cosmic balance. But are maybe dying. Maybe there's this notion that their time is over. The children are dying out. Leaf is kind of the last of the giants. They're lamenting. Their last of their kindred spirits are also dying, so maybe they're a dying power. And Bran will be the last of their kind.
Yep. And, as well, okay, fun part, because we're getting very deep and sad and sentimental, aren't we? Do you think that Dior Mormont's Raven has someone inside it then?
Someone who really likes corn, I guess.
Yes.
Happening there.
Because,
I mean, I think
that Raven is really smart.
So isn't the typical theory that it's actually, and it could be Bran, I guess, obviously time is not a river, but it's Bloodraven or some other green seer speaking through that raven.
Do you think it's another green seer? Because
one that kind of inhabited that and has lived in that raven. Actually, that's interesting.
And
it sounds like it sounds like these ravens live
been?
forever. Apparently, these ravens in the cave have been around a long time. So maybe that raven can last
forever, because we don't know how the raven came to be Dior's. Because has it been passed down for like hundreds of years or thousands of years? That it's just Dior has taken care of it for however long now. So that's how we think of it.
Could be, for sure.
Okay, so that was my funny point.
Well, I think it's fairly. I mean, it's fair to say that a lot of people do think that Bloodraven probably has something to do with that raven, but whether or not it's actually the case, it's harder to say.
I know.
So Mira and Jojen, are they going to leave at some point and go home?
Have you guys heard the theory that it's Jojen in the paste that Bran eats?
Yeah,
Yes.
of course. I really don't agree with it. Like, I'm like, nope, that would be too dark, and it's just
they were eating
bold
blood
minds.
porridge before, so
I mean,
like
we're just thinking about that because we're bored and we need new dark things to add to the story. Apparently, like, it's not gloomy and tragic and horrific enough. We need to add Georgian paste to it.
Yeah.
I really don't think it's true.
I think it's, I do. I kind of think it's pretty compelling because, like, he says he's going to die the whole journey and then he's suddenly super miserable.
And then he starts acting so differently.
Yeah.
Like, he knows something's up. So whether, like, is already dead, whether he's going to die, like, very soon, we don't know because Mira's just like, we were stupid to come here. So stupid.
And it would sort of
He'll literally
Don't
be
you
fed
think-
to Bran.
Yeah.
Don't you think it's just that his role and the reason he survived so long was to bring Bran to Bloodraven? And I mean, didn't Jojen have some kind of a disease when he was younger, and then he survived and got his green visions? Isn't the story? I'm not sure, but I think the point is he knows that he knows that his role is over. He brought Bran to Bloodraven, and so he expects to just die.
Mhm.
And I
But
guess
I don't
he
think it needs to be.
how he'll die and
Yeah.
when he'll die. So he's more like, I've done the purpose I've served, and I know I'm dying on my way home.
Maybe. But I don't know, just Mira and Jojen seem really depressed. Like,
Really.
Yeah.
like something's bad's
I mean-
going to happen.
Wouldn't you be? Like, you've traveled in the cold and in the danger for like so long. You finally get to this place you've been looking for, and it's just creepy and gloomy, and there's a guy who's
Yeah.
also a tree, and
All you get is a
And
bunch
But
of...
also, you'd think
But-
that they'd be like, hey, we get to go home finally, we've done our duty, let's
yeah,
just
and
go
they're
now.
like, it's like they've been forgotten. Like, no one cares whether they leave or stay, or it's just I would be depressed in that kind of environment, never seeing the sunlight and having nothing to do.
You
Well,
think
they
they have vitamin D deficiency, so that's why they're depressed?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Probably.
No gift shop waiting for them after this long journey. It's brutal.
Yeah.
Just a bunch of drugged out munchkins.
That's unfair.
And they run out of sugar too.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm pretty convinced by... It's definitely morbid. It's super creepy, but I'm pretty convinced by Jojen paste. I think there's a pretty strong like theme of cannibalism through Feast for Crows
There
and
is.
A Dance of Dragons. You get like Stannis' men eating
with
each
cold
other.
hands, they have
Sorry.
cold hands. They have like mystery meat with cold hands as well, and like they don't know what meat they're eating here because it's like, is it rat? Is it squirrel? I don't know. We can't tell. Is
Yeah.
it human?
And you
Is
get
it white wolf?
and you get Bran eating the human meat, and you get the stories of the Skegosi and Rickon being taken there, and Stannis' soldiers eating each other during their march. The phrase being baked into the pie by Manderley. So I could see that like being a subtle hint to Jojen paste.
And Mary is like, I'm checking out if that's the case. But as well, it might not necessarily be Jojen paste, but whether it's like human blood stored in the weirwoods and they tap it, and that's why it looks like blood. Like it has blood in its veins, that it's absorbed through human sacrifices.
Maybe. Yeah, and then we also get the final vision is the person being killed and the blood seeping into the roots, which could be like this sort of unconscious realization of what's become of Jojen. Also, it kind of reflects.
Also, Bran tastes blood as well, whether it's after being like, oh yeah, this paste is awesome, tastes so delicious. Whether he's like, it's actually tastes like blood in my mouth now.
Yeah.
which kind of is very similar to the sensation that Dany has when she's drinking the Shade of the Evening. Like, it's initially disgusting, but then the more she drinks it, the more delicious it tastes, and then she starts to have psychedelic visions. So it's a very similar scene to the House of the Undying. So apparently,
to have visions, you need to drink something that's disgusting at first, and then it gets good. Okay.
Well, the description is
maybe
very
it's the
similar.
same substance.
Yeah. It's actually a good point that the description is really similar.
And both Dany and Bran have kind of had these near-death experiences, like Bran going into the coma and Dany walking into the flames and her her miscarriage and all that. So it's potentially that, like Patchface, they're characters that have sort of been in touch with the spirit world, so they're much closer or much more susceptible to having those kinds of visions.
I'm down with that.
Yeah, completely. I mean, it's what the text seems to tell us, at least. Okay. On this sad note about Bran and the tragedy that is his life.
Sorry.
Do you have anything else?
One last point. I don't know if anyone's read the poem Kubla Khan by Samuel Taylor Coleridge, but there's a description. It's this poem that he wrote when he was basically high on opium and he was having these psychedelic visions. But the poem, it's this amazing romantic poem, and it describes basically this pleasure dome that was created by this Chinese emperor, or Mongolian emperor, I guess he was, Kubla Khan, the son of Genghis Khan. But one of the opening passages is this sunless sea that he describes flowing beneath the dome, which is a term that we hear in this chapter. And also the image of the children basically meditating and melting into the walls kind of, I thought, evoked this opium den where they're connected to the weirwood trees and in this psychedelic trance in which their mind has become kind of lost in the weirwood net while their bodies decay and melt. So that idea of losing yourself and just kind of, being dispersed into the cosmos. But yeah, it's a great poem.
Well, I gotta say, if this is what an opium den is, I am disappointed. I am very disappointed that
I know.
This is what it
You've been, mislaid.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, this has been a heavy episode.
Yeah.
It's a heavy chapter.
Yeah.
I think it's an amazing chapter.
Definitely.
It's probably my favorite in A Dance with Dragons. I think it's so creepy and weird and fantastical.
That seems crazy to me.
Written chapter. Like, it's very well written, but George should have done horror books.
He did.
Oh,
he had a career.
He did. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not reading them, so good.
Yeah, in between that chapter and the Brienne chapter, you can really see how good he is with horror stories.
Yeah.
I find the Alayne chapter a little bit horrifying in some ways too. So it touches. Yeah,
but in more usual ways for A Song of Ice and Fire.
Fair enough.
I guess. Yeah. Okay. Are we good?
Yep, all good.
Mm-hmm.
Great discussion, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This was super fun and super interesting. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Duncan, Sarah, Zach, and Jock for joining me.
Thank you, Marie.
Yeah, thank you for organizing.
Sorry if I got a bit carried away.
No, that's great. Okay, so for those following along at home, the next episode of the Reread will be hosted by Adam. I believe there are still some spots available if you want to join. It will cover Jon 5, Tyrion 5 from Dance, and Sam 3 from Feast. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, iTunes, WordPress by searching for Vassals of Kingsgrave. And as ever, you can get involved and participate in the discussion by searching for A Podcast of Ice and Fire and join the forums. And yeah, if you have any questions about these chapters or about the one following, just feel free to ask. We will try to answer them, and we appreciate you guys asking. So anyone has forthcoming episodes they want to talk about?
Hopefully 86.
Yeah.
Shameless
So
plug.
tune in for Reread 86 in like a long time because it's the
Yeah.
last Sansa chapter.
We're recording a
And I'll
review
probably
of...
not be on it.
Good, Duncan.
I think there's some lag, I'm sorry. We're recording the review of Season 2 of The Handmaid's Tale tomorrow evening, I believe. And I think you're on it, Zach?
Nope.
Nope, never mind. Cancel that. We'll
I have
soldier
not
on
watched
anyway.
that show.
And I think in a couple of
I'm sure
weeks
you
we're... for some reason I thought you were on the call. Anyway, and in a couple of weeks we're doing a return of book club, and we're going to be reviewing The Darkness That Comes Before by R. Scott Bakker, which is another very intense, violent, existential fantasy novel, which I have a lot of thoughts on.
Right.
What a discussion that will be. I'll be interested.
Yeah, I actually bought the book, but I still haven't started to read it. And everything I hear about it being very, almost philosophical, I'm like, do I really want to read this? So
Well,
I'll give it a try, if only
if-
to be able to listen to your discussion.
If you don't like Jojen paste, it might not be your cup of tea.
Accurate.
Well, I bought it, so I will try, definitely. And we'll see. Okay, see you guys soon, hopefully, and we'll have a nice day, night, evening, whatever, wherever you
Nap
are.
time.
Yeah. Bye, guys.
All right, see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
It
Thanks.
was lovely talking to you all.
You too.
Bye.
I guess the only other thing to mention in this chapter is that it's kind of the first memory we get of the kiss that never happened between Sansa and the Hound. This misremembered
It does
moment that occurs.
happen in this one.
Is this the chapter that it happened?
It's the next chapter, which is why I was so bummed when I realized. I was like, damn it. It was Sansa 3, Alayne 2, not Sansa 2, Alayne 1.
Oh.
I was so upset.
I could have
So,
sworn
like,
it was this
The
chapter.
next Sansa chapter, please have me on, or please have me host it. I want to do it. I have like a whole heap of theories. I can explain it. I want to be on it, please. to the
Well,
to the recording gods.
Okay.
well. So Chibina.
All right. Cut that out then.
Yes,
Put that in the next one.
Just send it to Bina and be like, please, Sarah wants to be on it. Please, 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 please.
Well, I gotta say, if this is what an opium den is, I am disappointed.
Sarah, for your information, Alayne 2/Sansa 3 is in episode 86, and the host isn't decided.
Oh, should I put my hand up now and be like, I'll do it. I don't care if I'm in the middle of exams. I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll do it.
you probably can. Oh my god, and Bina is so... it's making me so sad. She wrote episode 86, host to be decided, the last Sansa chapter, and in parenthesis, ever, interrogation mark, and I'm
Well,
like, no!
We actually have one
Don't
more,
be like
technically.
You know,
You-
this is the last Bran chapter.
Well, that's a good
Is it? Oh my god, it is.
last Bran chapter. But that's a good question. Are we
Because Bran-
including the Winds of Winter chapters in the linear reread? Because technically they take place during A Dance with Dragons.
Yeah, I think some of them are in the planned episodes. At least Bina put them there. Maybe we can revisit and discuss, but I think it would make sense.
The
And
Sansa one.
let's face
certainly
it, we have nothing else to discuss, so...
does.
Well, I gotta say, if this is what an opium den is, I am disappointed.
Do you guys have a
Every
favorite
time.
chapter in A Dance with Dragons?
I don't think so.
No.
I'll tell you when I find it.
Okay.
I can't remember if I do. It's really bad, but It's probably a Sansa one, or a Jaime one, or a Brienne one, or who else is in Dance with Dragons?
Well, they're not in Dance with Dragons, so
Reek
Reek.
chapters, Reek
Probably
chapters
not.
are amazing.
They are at
Reeks.
the end of it.
Reeks.
Maybe not
Like,
Brienne, though.
Oh my god.
Sansa's.
But
Oh
Brienne's one
love
of my
Reek.
favorite characters, so I'm more like, yeah.
yeah, the
like,
Reek ones, but
Yeah.
they're
Reek's chapters
super
are
depressing.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love them so much. They are so good. Like,
Yeah.
so good. Why were there only 3? Why couldn't there be more?
Only
Yeah,
three.
I really like I like Reek. I like Asha's story in this as well.
Mhm.
Basically the North stuff I generally
Yeah.
like, but I can't think of like a one chapter. This one's definitely a contender, the Bran one, but I can't think of like a one chapter that I really love from that book.